My wife, a lawyer, laughed when I lost my job. Always knew you'd fail. Didn't tell her about the patent I sold for $167 million. When she filed for divorce to upgrade, I agreed to everything. When she and her lawyer found out months later, they were, "Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. I'm Adrian Okoye, and yeah, I'm about to tell you a story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about love, marriage, and why prenups exist. But we're starting at the beginning. Back when I was still naive enough to believe that fairy tales weren't just Disney's way of setting us up for spectacular failure. Picture this. A rooftop party in downtown Seattle. One of those pretentious affairs where everyone's holding craft beer they can't pronounce and talking about their passion projects that'll never see daylight. I'm nursing my second IPA, trying to look like I belong among all these LinkedIn profiles come to life when I spot her across the crowd. Sabrina Hole and brother, let me tell you, she was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make every other conversation suddenly feel like background noise. She had this way about her, sharp as a tack, quick with her words, and the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself because it was just there. You know, the type, the woman who never missed a detail, never forgot a face, and could probably recite the terms and conditions she'd skimmed 3 months ago. She was wearing this little black dress that probably cost more than my rent. And she was holding court with a group of suits who were hanging on her every word like she was delivering the Sermon on the Mount. Now, I'm not usually the guy who walks up to the intimidating woman at the party. Hell, I'm barely the guy who goes to parties, but something about her pulled me in like a tractor beam. Maybe it was the way she laughed. Not that fake tinkly sound most people make at networking events, but genuine from the gut laughter that made you want to know what was so damn funny. Or maybe it was just the beer talking. Either way, I found myself walking over there like I had some kind of plan. "Adrian ooey," I said, extending my hand when there was a lull in whatever fascinating conversation they were having about quarterly projections or whatever soul-crushing topic passes for small talk in these circles. She looked at me, really looked like she was running some kind of internal background check, and then smiled. Sabrina Holt, Junior Associate at Harrington & Pike. The way she said it, you could hear the pride in her voice. This wasn't just her job. This was her identity, her climbing the ladder to success badge of honor. "Software engineer," I replied, trying to match her energy. "I build tools I actually believe in, which apparently makes me some kind of unicorn in this industry." That got a real laugh out of her. The kind that crinkled her eyes at the corners. Idealist programmer. Now I've seen everything. And just like that, we were talking. Not the surface level bull you usually get at these things, but actual conversation. She told me about the case she was working on, some corporate merger that was apparently more complicated than quantum physics. And I found myself genuinely interested. Not because I gave a damn about corporate law, but because watching her explain it was like watching an artist work. Every word was deliberate, every pause calculated for maximum impact. I told her about my current project at Vectorum Systems, this algorithm I'd been developing that could optimize data processing in ways that would make your head spin. Most people's eyes glaze over when I start talking shop. But Sabrina leaned in, asked questions that showed she was actually listening, not just waiting for her turn to speak. "So, you're saying you can make computers think faster?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "More like I can make them think smarter." "There's a difference." "I like smart," she said. And the way she said it made my stomach do this stupid little flip that I hadn't felt since high school. We ended up talking until the party started winding down until the rooftop cleared out and it was just us and the city lights stretching out below. She was everything I wasn't. Polished, ambitious in that ruthless way that meant she'd probably step over her own grandmother to make partner. But there was something magnetic about her drive, her absolute certainty that she was going to get exactly what she wanted out of life. "I should probably head out," she said eventually, glancing at her phone. Even at midnight, she looked like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. Meanwhile, I probably looked like I'd been hit by a truck full of craft beer and unrealistic expectations. "Can I get your number?" I asked, trying to play it cool and probably failing spectacularly. She studied me for a moment like she was weighing the pros and cons, running some kind of cost-benefit analysis on whether I was worth her time. Then she smiled, confident, knowing like she'd already decided something I wasn't privy to yet. "Sure," she said, and rattled off her digits while I fumbled with my phone like a teenager asking his crush to prom. And that's how it started, with late coffees that turned into dinners, with conversations that stretched until 2 a.m. with me falling harder and faster than a lead balloon. My best friend Tar, God bless his honest soul, took one look at me during this whole courtship phase and said, "Bro, you're looking at that woman like a drowning man looks at land." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was desperate. But it didn't feel desperate. It felt certain. Like everything in my life had been leading up to that moment on the rooftop. Like all the failed relationships and awkward dates and lonely Friday nights had been preparing me for Sabrina Hull. We fell into this rhythm, this comfortable pattern of shared dinners and weekend adventures. She introduced me to her world. Charity galas where everyone spoke in fundraising goals and tax write-offs, wine tastings where I learned the difference between notes of oak and hints of pretension. I showed her mine. Quiet coffee shops where we could actually hear each other think. Hiking trails where her heels couldn't follow. Late night coding sessions where she'd curl up on my couch with legal briefs while I debugged my way to enlightenment. 6 months in, I knew, not suspected, not hoped, knew, this woman was going to be my wife, the mother of my kids, the person I'd grow old and cranky with. So, I did what any rational man in love does. I bought a ring that cost more than my car, and planned a proposal that would either end in eternal happiness or spectacular rejection. I chose the same rooftop where we'd met because I'm nothing if not sentimental. Got the whole place to ourselves for an evening, complete with fairy lights and champagne that definitely wasn't from the grocery store. When I dropped to one knee and pulled out that little velvet box, her reaction was perfect. Vintage Sabrina. She laughed. Not at me, not cruel or dismissive, but at the timing, at the poetry of it all, at whatever cosmic joke had brought us to that moment. Then, while I was still kneeling there like an idiot, wondering if laughter was a good sign or if I should start planning my graceful retreat, she said the word that changed everything. Yes. It felt like the start of something stable and bright, like we'd figured out the secret that half of America couldn't crack. We were going to be the couple who made it, who grew old together, who never needed marriage counseling or separate bedrooms or whatever other relationship band-aids people use to hold their lives together. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I missed, all the red flags I painted green in my head because I was so determined to make it work. But in that moment, with Sabrina in my arms, and the city sprawling out below us like our own personal kingdom, I felt like the luckiest bastard alive. I had no idea I was actually the biggest fool in Seattle. So, here's the thing about marriage. Everyone tells you it's hard work, but nobody mentions that half the work is just pretending you've got your together for people who are probably pretending the exact same thing. Case in point, the first year of being Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Uwe when we were basically performing successful young couple like it was a full-time job. Work was good. And by good, I mean I was actually making the kind of money that didn't require me to check my bank balance before buying groceries. I'd landed this sweet gig leading a small team at Vectorum Systems where I got to play with cutting-edge tech and pretend I was changing the world one algorithm at a time. My team was solid bunch of coding nerds who spoke my language and didn't mind when I got a little too excited about optimization protocols. We were building something real, something that mattered, and I was getting paid handsomely for the privilege. Sabrina was climbing her own ladder at Harrington and Pike, pulling in decent money, and collecting billable hours like Pokemon cards. Between the two of us, we were what financial advisors probably jerk off to. Dual income, no kids, stable careers, and the kind of credit scores that made bank managers weep with joy. So, naturally, we did what every self-respecting young professional couple does. We bought a house. Not just any house, mind you, but a tidy little townhouse in Queen and that screamed, "We've made it." Without being obnoxious about it. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a kitchen with granite countertops that Sabrina insisted were investment grade, and a tiny backyard where we could pretend we might someday grill things and host barbecues like real adults. The mortgage application process was like a financial colonoscopy. But hey, when you're Adrian Uwe with a steady paycheck and a credit score that could run for political office, banks practically throw money at you. Sabrina handled most of the paperwork because, let's face it, the woman could negotiate her way out of a maximum security prison if she put her mind to it. Within 6 weeks, we had keys, a 30-year commitment to debt, and the kind of pride that comes with owning something that's technically yours until you miss a payment. Then came the car situation. Sabrina's little Honda Civic was perfectly fine for a single woman navigating city streets, but apparently it didn't fit our new image as homeowners. Her words, not mine. So, we upgraded to a second-hand SUV. Nothing fancy, just a reliable Toyota that could haul furniture and make us look like we were ready for the suburban lifestyle we were apparently auditioning for. And let me tell you about Sabrina's parents, Beatrice and Gerald Hull. The kind of people who measured success in square footage and investment portfolios. They'd been politely skeptical of me during our engagement, probably wondering if their princess was settling for some random black guy with big dreams and a decent salary. But the moment they walked through our front door and saw that mortgage was in my name, saw that our pantry was stocked like we were preparing for the apocalypse. Suddenly, I went from Sabrina's boyfriend to our future son-in-law who clearly has his priorities straight. Gerald, bless his corporate soul, Even started asking my opinion on market trends and tech stocks like I was some kind of oracle. "Adrian, what do you think about this cryptocurrency business?" He'd ask over Sunday dinner, leaning forward like he was about to receive the secrets of the universe. I'd give him some reasonably informed response about blockchain technology, and he'd nod sagely like I'd just solved world hunger. Beatrice was more subtle, but no less approving. She'd compliment our furniture choices, ask about our neighborhood, make little comments about how stable everything looked. Translation: her daughter had married well, and their retirement conversations could now include phrases like, "When we visit the kids," instead of, "If Sabrina ever settles down, Sabrina ate it up." She loved beautiful things, always had, but now she could afford them without the guilt. We started hitting up those quiet restaurants where the servers know your name and the wine list requires a sommelier degree to navigate. She'd order things I couldn't pronounce while I stuck to whatever looked familiar and didn't cost more than my car payment. She developed this thing for small designer pieces, not the flashy, logo-heavy stuff that screams, "I'm trying too hard." But the subtle, expensive kind that whispers, "I have taste." And a bank account to prove it. A handbag here, a pair of shoes there, maybe a watch that cost more than most people's rent. Nothing crazy, nothing that would break us, but enough to make her feel like she was living the life she'd always imagined. And the trips. Jesus Christ. The trips. Sabrina loved going places where nobody knew us, where we could be mysterious and sophisticated instead of just Adrian and Sabrina from Seattle, who argued about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. Weekend getaways to Portland, longer vacations to places I had to Google to spell correctly. She'd research these boutique hotels and hidden restaurants like she was planning military operations, and I'd go along because seeing her happy made me feel like I was winning at life. Our social circle started expanding, too, which was both a blessing and a curse. Monica, Sabrina's closest friend from law school, was basically attached to Sabrina's hip whenever they weren't working. Monica was one of those women who looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Always perfectly put together, always ready with an opinion about wine or interior design or whatever topic was supposed to matter to people like us. Then there was Victor from my team who became our go-to guy for double dates and group dinners. Victor was cool, the kind of programmer who could talk code with me for hours, but also hold his own in conversations about anything else. He got the technical stuff, understood why I'd get excited about some new development framework. But he could also charm Sabrina and Monica with stories about his latest hiking adventures or his attempts to learn French cooking. And of course, there was Aunt Ngoy, my father's sister, who'd basically raised me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 15. She was our spiritual advisor, our conscience, our reminder that success meant more than just accumulating stuff. Aunt Goy would come over for Sunday dinners, bless our food, pray for our marriage, and occasionally drop truth bombs that made everyone else at the table suddenly very interested in their plates. "Money is good," she'd say in that no-nonsense way of hers. "But don't let it become your God." I've seen too many couples worship their bank accounts and forget to worship each other. Sabrina would nod politely, but I could see her filing away and Go's comments in the sweet but outdated advice category. To Sabrina, money wasn't God. It was freedom. Freedom to live the life she wanted. To be the person she'd always known she could be. To prove to everyone who'd ever doubted her that she could have it all. On the outside, we looked like the couple who had read the manual and followed it perfectly. Nice house, nice car, nice clothes, nice friends, nice vacations. We were checking all the boxes, hitting all the milestones, living the American dream with a capital A and a capital D. We were the Instagram-worthy couple, the ones other people looked at and thought, "Why can't my relationship be like that?" We had dinner parties where everyone laughed at the right moments and complimented our wine choices. We had game nights that ended with everyone saying we should definitely do this more often. We had that comfortable, settled vibe that made people assume we'd figured out something they were still working on. And you know what? For a while there, I believed it, too. I thought we'd crack the code, solve the puzzle, found the formula that would keep us happy and successful forever. I looked at our life, our beautiful, carefully curated, perfectly managed life. And I felt like the luckiest bastard in the Pacific Northwest. I had no idea we were building a house of cards in a hurricane zone. You know that moment when you're cruising along in life, thinking you've got everything figured out and then reality decides to sucker punch you in the gut just to remind you who's really in charge? Yeah. Well, welcome to my third year of marriage when the universe decided to teach me a master class. And things can always get worse. Vectorum Systems hit what the executives like to call a strategic plateau, which is corporate speak for we're going to smile and pretend everything's fine until someone figures out how to unfuck us. The company had been riding high on some earlier successes, but the market shifted, competitors caught up, and suddenly we were that tech company everyone whispers about at industry conferences. The one that had promise but couldn't quite figure out how to turn innovation into sustainable profit. The first sign was the bonus freeze, not cancelled, mind you, frozen. Temporarily suspended pending market conditions and Q4 performance metrics. According to the email that landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, like a digital turd in my coffee, I read it 3 times, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that didn't mean sorry. That extra money you were counting on. Yeah, not happening. Then came the meetings. Oh, sweet Jesus. The meetings. Conference rooms full of people in expensive suits talking about pivoting strategies and optimizing operational efficiency while everyone else tried to figure out if they should update their LinkedIn profiles or just stick it out and hope for the best. The mood in the office went from cautiously optimistic to funeral home quiet in about 2 weeks. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean life-changingly, divorce-causingly bank account-alteringly interesting. During one of those soul-crushing strategy sessions, our fearless leadership dropped a little bombshell that would later turn out to be the best worst thing that ever happened to me. If the company gets acquired, announced our CEO, a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a Harvard Business School recruitment poster. Any employee patents that were personally filed can be sold independently by the patent holder. These assets are not considered company intellectual property and will not be part of any acquisition deal. Now, most people in that room probably heard that sentence and thought, great, another legal complication to worry about. But me, that sentence hit my brain like a lightning bolt hitting a Tesla coil. Because sitting in my desk drawer, filed properly and maintained meticulously, was a patent for an algorithm that could optimize data processing in ways that would make Google engineers weep tears of pure joy. See, I'm not just some code monkey who shows up, writes functions, and goes home. I'm that annoying type of programmer who gets obsessed with efficiency, who stays up until 3 a.m. because I figured out a way to make something run 30% faster, who files patents for my innovations because I watched too many episodes of Shark Tank and learned the hard way that intellectual property is the difference between being employed and being unemployed but rich. This particular algorithm was my baby, my masterpiece, my you to every professor who said I'd never amount to anything. It was lean, elegant, and useful in the way that made enterprise software actually work instead of just existing to torture IT departments. And the beautiful part, it was mine. Not Vector's, not the shareholders, not some venture capitalists. Mine, filed under my name, maintained with my money, clean as a whistle, and twice as sharp. But I didn't tell anyone. Not my team, not my boss, not even Sabrina. Well, except for Marta Sean, my mentor and the smartest woman in tech who'd ever bothered to give me the time of day. Marta was one of those rare Silicon Valley veterans who'd survived 3 boom-bust cycles and still had her soul intact. She'd taken me under her wing when I was a junior developer, taught me everything from advanced algorithms to office politics, and had become something like a professional fairy godmother. When I told her about the patent and what leadership had said, she got that look on her face, the one she wore when she was processing information at light speed and calculating odds like some kind of human quantum computer. Adrian, she said, leaning back in her chair at our usual coffee shop. If a sale ever happens, do not rush. Structure first, then negotiate. And for the love of God, don't tell anyone what you're sitting on until you've got legal counsel and a plan. You think they'll actually sell? I asked, trying to sound casual while my heart was doing Olympic gymnastics in my chest. Honey, they're bleeding money and running out of runway. Someone's going to scoop them up for the client base and the talent. And when they do, your little algorithm is going to look very attractive to whoever's writing the checks. I went home that night with my brain buzzing like I'd mainly espresso and Red Bull. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had options. Not guarantees, not certainties, but actual honest-to-God options that didn't involve polishing my resume and begging for interviews. But when I walked through our front door, ready to share some version of this development with my wife, not the specifics, just the general idea that maybe our financial future wasn't as precarious as it seemed, I ran headfirst into Hurricane Sabrina. So she said before I'd even taken off my jacket. No bonus again. The way she said again made it sound like I'd been personally responsible for tanking the entire tech economy. She was standing in our kitchen still in her work clothes, but with that rigid posture that meant she'd been thinking about this conversation all day and had prepared her arguments like she was addressing a jury. The whole company struggling, Sabrina. It's never just anything with you, is it? She interrupted. And there was something in her tone that I'd never heard before. Something cold and calculating, like she was evaluating me the same way she'd evaluate a stock portfolio that wasn't performing to expectations. Look, things might turn around. There are some developments. Developments? She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I'd fallen in love with on that rooftop. This was sharper, meaner, the kind of laugh that cut instead of healed. Adrian, I'm making junior associate money at a mid-tier firm. You're supposed to be the tech genius bringing in the big bucks. What exactly are we developing here besides debt? And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious months earlier. Sabrina hadn't married me because she loved my sense of humor or my algorithmic brilliance or my devastatingly handsome face. She'd married me because she thought I was going to be financially successful. And now that my success was looking questionable, so was her interest in being Mrs. Adrienne Oquo. The kitchen suddenly felt cold, like someone had opened a window to lead in the Seattle winter. I stood there looking at my wife. This woman I'd thought I knew, this woman I'd built dreams with and saw something I'd never noticed before. She wasn't looking at me like her husband who was going through a rough patch. She was looking at me like a bad investment. She was starting to regret. We'll figure it out, I said, because what else do you say when your marriage suddenly feels like a business partnership that's failing to meet quarterly projections? But as I watched her turn away and start aggressively loading the dishwasher like the plates had personally offended her, I realized that we might be a much smaller group than I'd previously thought. And that patent in my desk drawer suddenly felt less like a safety net and more like a life raft I might need sooner than I'd ever imagined. That night, lying in bed next to a wife who felt like a stranger, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly I'd become the kind of man who kept secrets from the person who was supposed to be my partner in everything. But as I listened to Sabrina's breathing beside me, measured, controlled, nothing like the soft sighs of contentment I remembered from our early days, I realized that maybe I wasn't keeping secrets. Maybe I was just finally learning to protect myself. You ever notice how people change when they get a little taste of power? Not the dramatic overnight transformation you see in movies, but the slow burn kind where you wake up one day and realize the person sleeping next to you has been replaced by someone who wears their face but speaks with a completely different voice. Welcome to year 4 of my marriage when Sabrina Oquo decided to show me exactly who she'd been planning to become all along. The promotion came through in March. Mid-level associate at Harrington and Pike, which in lawyer land is basically like going from minor league to the majors. Suddenly, Sabrina wasn't just another eager junior attorney billing hours and fetching coffee for partners. She had her own cases, her own clients, her own little corner of legal power where she could make decisions that actually mattered. And with that power came what I started calling the lawyer voice. Gone was the woman who used to laugh at my stupid jokes and speak to me like I was her husband instead of a witness she was cross-examining. In her place was this sleek, professional version of Sabrina who measured every word, calculated every response, and seemed to view our marriage like it was just another contract that needed to be constantly renegotiated in her favor. Image is everything. Adrian, she'd say when I'd suggest we grab takeout instead of spending $80 on dinner at some trendy spot where the portions were smaller than my will to live. We can't live like this. Like this. Those 2 words became her favorite weapon. Deployed whenever our lifestyle didn't match whatever fantasy she'd cooked up about how successful couples were supposed to exist. Like this meant fewer dinners out because my company was still hemorrhaging money like a punctured artery. Like this meant one vacation that year instead of the quarterly getaways she'd become accustomed to. Like this meant she couldn't buy that new designer bag she'd been eyeing without actually checking our bank account first. God forbid we should live within our means like regular human beings. The late nights started around the same time as the attitude adjustment strategy sessions. She'd explain when she rolled in at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., sometimes not at all. Client dinners. You understand how important networking is in my field. Right. Right. Because nothing says professional networking like coming home at dawn smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine and acting like I was the for asking where she'd been. Monica's social media became my accidental surveillance system. And let me tell you, Instagram stories are a real when you're trying to maintain plausible deniability about your wife's extracurricular activities. Photo after photo of girls' nights where Sabrina looked too free, too single, too much like a woman who'd forgotten she had a husband waiting at home. There was Sabrina at some upscale bar, laughing with her head thrown back like she didn't have a care in the world. There was Sabrina at a wine tasting, her left hand conspicuously positioned so you couldn't see her wedding ring. There was Sabrina at what looked like a house party, surrounded by men in suits who were definitely not other female attorneys having innocent professional conversations. But every time I brought it up, I got the lawyer voice. Calm, rational, slightly condescending, like I was a child who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of adult professional relationships. Those are colleagues, Adrian. This is how business gets done in the real world. Maybe if you understood professional networking, you wouldn't be stuck in middle management at a failing company. Middle management at a failing company. Each word delivered with surgical precision designed to cut just deep enough to leave a scar without drawing visible blood. This from the woman who used to brag to her friends about her brilliant husband, the software engineer who was going to change the world. Tar saw it before I did. Of course, my best friend had always been too smart for his own good, and he had this annoying habit of pointing out uncomfortable truths that I wasn't ready to hear. "Bro, you're being graded," he told me one night over beers while I was explaining away Sabrina's latest disappearing act. "And the exam isn't fair because she's the teacher, the student, and the one setting the curve." What's that supposed to mean? It means she's testing you, man. Testing whether you're still worth the investment she made when she married you. And right now, you're failing her little quiz. I wanted to argue with him to defend my wife and my marriage and the life we built together. But deep down in that place where you keep the truths you don't want to admit, even to yourself, I knew he was right. Sabrina wasn't just disappointed in our current situation. She was reevaluating our entire relationship based on some cost-benefit analysis I wasn't privy to. So, I tried harder. Jesus Christ. I tried so hard it was embarrassing. I started cooking more elaborate dinners, thinking maybe if I could create the perfect domestic environment, she'd remember why she'd fallen in love with me in the first place. I'd spend my evenings researching recipes, shopping for ingredients we couldn't really afford, and preparing meals that would make Gordon Ramsay weep with pride. "This is nice," she'd say, picking at her perfectly prepared salmon like it was cafeteria food. "But we really should be going out more. People notice when you disappear from the social scene." I started listening more, or at least trying to. When she'd come home from work, I'd put down whatever I was doing and give her my full attention, asking about her cases, her colleagues, her day. But instead of bringing us closer, it just gave her more opportunities to remind me how much more important her job was than mine. "You wouldn't understand the complexity of corporate litigation," she'd say when I try to offer advice or even just show interest. "It's not like debugging code. There are real stakes here. Real consequences. Real stakes. Real consequences." As if my work was just some elaborate video game, and hers was the only job that mattered in the adult world. The silence grew between us like some kind of toxic mold, feeding on disappointment and resentment until it filled every room in our carefully curated house. We'd sit at our granite countertop breakfast bar, the same one she'd insisted was investment grade, eating our meals without speaking, two strangers who happened to share a mortgage and a last name. I'd try to start conversations about our future, our plans, our dreams, anything to reconnect with the woman I'd married, but every topic seemed to lead back to money, or rather my lack of it, my stalled career, my failed bonuses, my inability to provide the lifestyle she'd apparently been promised when she'd said yes to my proposal on that rooftop a lifetime ago. The worst part wasn't the criticism or the distance or even the obvious signs that she was checking out of our marriage. One networking event at a time. The worst part was how I started believing her. Started thinking that maybe I really was failing as a husband, as a provider, as a man. That maybe her disappointment was justified and her pulling away was just the natural consequence of my own inadequacy. But late at night, when she'd finally come home and slip into bed beside me like a ghost, I'd lie there staring at the ceiling and thinking about that patent sitting in my desk drawer. That beautiful, elegant, potentially life-changing algorithm that represented everything I was good at, everything I'd worked for, everything she couldn't see because she was too busy cataloging my failures. And I'd wonder if maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't that I was failing her tests. Maybe the problem was that I'd never agreed to take them in the first place. You know that scene in horror movies where everything goes quiet right before the monster jumps out? That moment when the music stops, the wind dies down, and you know something terrible is about to happen, but you can't do anything except sit there and wait for it. Yeah. Well, my life became that scene the day Vectorum Systems finally got swallowed by the corporate machine. And I had to tell my wife that her worst nightmare had officially come true. The acquisition happened fast, the way these things always do in tech. One day, we're getting pep talks about weathering the storm and emerging stronger. And the next day, there's a press release announcing that Megit Tech Solutions had acquired us for our talented workforce and established client relationships. Translation: they wanted our customer list and maybe 3 of our developers, and the rest of us could go ourselves with a rusty USB cable. The new owners brought their own people, their own systems, their own ideas about how things should run. And surprise, surprise, those ideas didn't include keeping around a mid-level team leader who'd been making decent money to develop algorithms that might compete with their existing products. I got called into HR on a Tuesday morning and walked out with a severance package that was generous enough to make me feel grateful and insulting enough to make me want to burn the building down. But here's the thing about severance packages. They're designed to make you disappear quietly, to take your little pile of cash and slink away without causing trouble or asking uncomfortable questions about why a profitable division got gutted in favor of whatever garbage the new owners were peddling. And normally that's exactly what I would have done. Taken my money, updated my LinkedIn, and started the soul-crushing process of job hunting in a market that thinks anyone over 30 is basically dead weight with outdated skills. Except I wasn't normal anymore. I had that patent sitting in my desk drawer like a loaded gun. And I was starting to suspect that the bullets in that gun were worth more than my entire severance package. But I couldn't think about that yet. Couldn't even process what it might mean. Because first I had to go home and tell my wife that I was unemployed. I planned it out like a military operation. I'd wait until after dinner. When we were both relaxed and full of the expensive wine, she'd started insisting we buy even though our budget was tighter than a nun's grip on her rosary. I'd ease into it. Maybe start with the positives. The severance was decent. I had options. This might actually be an opportunity to find something better. I'd be calm, confident, reassuring. I'd remind her that we had savings, that we'd been smart with our money, that this was just a temporary setback in our otherwise upward trajectory. But you know what they say about the best laid plans? They usually get sideways by reality before you even get to the good part. I walked through a front door that evening, still carrying my pathetic little cardboard box of desk supplies like some kind of corporate refugee, and Sabrina took one look at me and knew. Maybe it was the shell-shocked expression on my face, or the fact that I was home at 3:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, or just that predatory instinct that lawyers develop for sensing weakness in their prey. "They let you go," she said. Not a question, just a statement of fact delivered in that flat, emotionless tone she used when she was processing information that was going to require immediate strategic response. I set the box down on our kitchen counter right next to the fruit bowl we never used because we were always too busy to eat fruit, and tried to find the words I'd been rehearsing all afternoon. "The acquisition went through," I said, going for calm and reasonable. "They brought their own team. I got a decent severance package," and that's when she laughed. Not the surprised laugh of someone who's just heard unexpected news or the nervous laugh of someone trying to process difficult information. This was something else entirely, clean, brutal, and sharp enough to cut glass. It started low in her throat and built into something that sounded almost gleeful, like she'd just heard the punchline to a joke she'd been waiting years for someone to tell. "Of course they did," she said when the laughter finally died down. "Of course you got fired. I should have seen this coming from a mile away. Sabrina, it's not always new you'd fail," she continued in the way she said it. So matter of fact, so confident, like she was stating something as obvious as the sky being blue. Hit me harder than if she'd picked up a kitchen knife and stabbed me in the chest. "You're not built for the rooms I walk into." The rooms she walked into like success was some exclusive club with a dress code I'd never learned and entry requirements I couldn't meet. Like I was some kind of imposter who'd been pretending to belong in her world until reality finally caught up and exposed me for the fraud I'd always been. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how she kept saying it over and over, like she was testing out different versions of the same insult to see which one cut deepest. She said it to Monica during one of their wine-soaked bitching sessions loud enough for me to hear from the next room. She said it to her parents over Sunday dinner, complete with that patronizing smile that suggested she was sharing some kind of profound insight about the fundamental nature of human ambition. "Adrian's a sweet man," she'd tell anyone who'd listen. "But he's just not built for the rooms I walk into. Some people are meant for middle management. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that." Except everything about the way she said it suggested there was plenty wrong with it. Plenty wrong with me. Plenty wrong with the choice she'd made when she'd agreed to marry someone who apparently wasn't worthy of whatever rarefied air she'd started breathing at her fancy law firm. I kept my face calm during these little character assassinations. Kept my hand still. Kept my voice level when I had to respond. But inside, something was changing. Inside, that patent was starting to feel less like a safety net and more like a secret weapon. A trump card that nobody knew I was holding, least of all the women who'd apparently been keeping a running tally of my failures since the day we'd said, "I do." Aunt Gozie came by the following Sunday like she always did, bringing her homemade pepper soup and her uncanny ability to see through from 3 counties away. She took one look at the tension in our dining room. Sabrina picking at her food while making subtle comments about realistic expectations and accepting limitations. Me sitting there like a kicked dog trying not to react, and waited until Sabrina went to take a call from Monica before pulling me aside. "Don't fight in the open," she said, pressing a small silver cross into my palm. Her hands were warm and steady, and for a moment, I felt like that 15-year-old kid she'd taken in after my parents died, desperate for someone to tell him everything was going to be okay. Build in the quiet. Some battles are won before the other side even knows there's a war. I wanted to tell her about the patent, about the phone calls I'd been getting from companies interested in my work, about the lawyers I'd been quietly consulting with on my lunch breaks. But something held me back. Maybe wisdom, maybe paranoia, maybe just the same instinct that had kept me from sharing too much with Sabrina over the past few months. Instead, I just nodded and slipped the cross into my pocket where it sat like a small reminder that somebody still believed in me even when I was struggling to believe in myself. That night, after Sabrina had gone to bed without so much as a good night, I sat in my home office and stared at that patent application on my computer screen. All those hours of work, all that brilliance reduced to legal language and technical specifications. But underneath the dry bureaucratic prose was something beautiful, something powerful, something that belonged to me and nobody else. And for the first time since I'd heard Sabrina's laugh echoing through our kitchen, I smiled because she was right. I wasn't built for the room she walked into. I was built for something much better than that. You know what's funny about divorce papers? They're probably the most honest documents you'll ever see in a failing marriage. All that about growing apart and irreconcilable differences when what they really mean is one person decided the other person wasn't profitable enough to keep around. But hey, at least they're direct about it. Unlike the months of passive-aggressive warfare that usually precede them, the papers arrived on a Thursday morning via courier because apparently regular mail wasn't dramatic enough for the dissolution of the Uy family empire. I was sitting in my home office fielding calls from headhunters who all wanted to know why I'd been displaced from Victorian corporate speak for fired but with more syllables to make it sound classier when this kid in a uniform showed up at my door with a manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. Inside was my marriage reduced to legal language and formatted with the kind of neat headings and confident margins that screamed professional job by people who bill by the hour. Sabrina had gone with Morrison, Kane, and Associates, the kind of white shoe divorce firm that specializes in helping dissatisfied spouses extract maximum value from their soon-to-be exortners. These weren't the lawyers you hire when you want an amicable split. These were the sharks you call when you want to strip the carcass clean. The reason for divorce was listed as "we've grown apart. I need an upgrade." Not kidding. That's literally what it said. Like I was an iPhone she'd outgrown and now wanted to trade in for the latest model. The casual cruelty of it was almost impressive in its completeness. No mention of trying to work things out. No token gestures toward counseling or separation. Just a clean surgical removal of me from her life so she could get on with whatever upgrade she had in mind. The financial demands were exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd been calculating this move for months. She wanted the house. Obviously couldn't have her dating profile listing some apartment address when she was trying to attract the kind of men who measured success in square footage and property values. She wanted the SUV because taking the bus wasn't compatible with her new image as an available professional woman. She wanted the furniture, the art, the kitchen appliances, basically everything we'd accumulated during our brief experiment in domestic bliss. And then there was the alimony. Sweet Jesus, the alimony. According to her lawyers, I owed Sabrina ongoing financial support to maintain her established standard of living while she transitioned to single life because apparently the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to during our marriage was my responsibility to fund even after she decided I wasn't worthy of sharing it with her. I should have been pissed. I should have been outraged, indignant, ready to fight this obvious cash grab with every legal weapon I could afford. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Pure, clean, overwhelming relief that this nightmare was finally ending. And I could stop pretending we were going to work things out. Because here's the thing, nobody tells you about divorce. Sometimes the papers aren't the beginning of a battle. They're the end of a war you've been losing for years. Sabrina wasn't taking anything from me. She was just making it official that she'd already decided I had nothing she wanted except my bank account. I called Ioma Duru that afternoon. Ioma was the kind of lawyer other lawyers respected and opposing counsel feared. A Nigerian woman who'd clawed her way to the top of Seattle's legal hierarchy by being smarter, more prepared, and more ruthless than everyone else in the room. She'd handled my parents' estate when I was too young and traumatized to deal with the legal complexities of sudden orphanhood. And she'd been my go-to for every major legal decision since then. Adrian, she said when I explained the situation, they're trying to steamroll you because they think you're desperate and broke. Are you desperate and broke? Depends on your definition of broke, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. My checking account was looking pretty anemic, and my prospects for immediate employment weren't exactly inspiring confidence. Then we negotiate from a position of strength you don't actually have. She said with the kind of cold pragmatism that made her worth every penny of her ridiculous hourly rate. They want speed and certainty. We give them both but on terms that protect your future. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting the financial demands, which would have dragged things out for months and cost more in legal fees than the assets were worth, we give Sabrina everything she wanted, but structure it in a way that protected me from any future claims if my circumstances changed. Here's what we're going to do, Finoma explained during our marathon strategy session. We calculate the total alimony upfront and pay it as a lump sum from your severance. Clean, simple, done. No monthly payments, no ongoing obligations, no court dates to modify support if either of your situations change. And if she says no, she won't, because her lawyers are going to tell her that a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, especially when the bird in the bush might get eaten by a cat named unemployment. But the real master stroke was the second part of our offer. A mutual clause that would forever prevent either of us from making additional financial claims against the other. No matter what happened in the future, lottery wins, inheritance, career breakthroughs, whatever, we'd be legally barred from coming back for more money. This is overprotective. Emo warned me. If you win the lottery next week, she can't touch it. But if she becomes a millionaire partner at her firm, you can't touch that either. You sure you want this level of finality? I thought about Sabrina's laugh, about the rooms I supposedly wasn't built for, about the months of quiet contempt and not so subtle suggestions that I was dragging her down. I thought about that patent sitting in my desk drawer and the phone calls I'd been getting from companies that understood its value better than my wife ever had. Yeah, I said I wanted bulletproof. The negotiation was surprisingly brief. Kane Whitlow, Sabrina's lead attorney, was exactly what you'd expect from a guy who specialized in high net worth divorce cases. Expensive suit, perfect teeth, and the kind of confident handshake that said he'd been extracting money from disappointed spouses since before I learned to tie my shoes. He reviewed our offer with the kind of theatrical frowning that probably looked impressive to clients who were paying him $500 an hour to frown professionally. This clause is overprotective, he said, echoing Ioma's warning, but with more condescension. Your client may regret waiving all future claims. What if his circumstances improve dramatically? I almost laughed. What if my circumstances improved? Brother, if only you knew what was sitting in my filing cabinet, just waiting for the right moment to completely rewrite the definition of improved circumstances. But Sabrina was already reaching for the pen before he'd finished his objection. She wanted out, wanted it fast, wanted to post her victory on social media, and start shopping for whatever upgrade she'd been eyeing. The idea that I might someday be worth more than my current severance package probably seemed as likely as me sprouting wings and flying to the moon. I just want this over with, she said. And for the first time in months, we agreed on something completely. She signed with that same confident flourish she'd used on our marriage certificate, probably thinking she'd just executed the financial coup of the century. I signed with steady hands, thinking about freedom, about possibilities, about the beautiful irony of paying for my own liberation with money I'd gotten from getting fired. 2 weeks later, I wired the lump sum alimony payment. Every penny calculated and agreed upon, clean and final. Then I loaded my 2 suitcases into the back of an Uber and left our perfect townhouse for the last time. I didn't look back, didn't take one last sentimental walk through the rooms where we'd played house and pretended to be happy. Because here's what Sabrina never understood, what her expensive lawyers never explained, what all her cost-benefit analyses never accounted for. Sometimes the best investment you can make is buying your way out of a bad partnership before it destroys everything you've worked for. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very smart, you get to do it with money that's about to become the least important thing in your bank account. Patience is a funny thing. Most people think it's about waiting passively for good things to happen, like some kind of cosmic lottery where you just buy your ticket and hope for the best. But real patience, the kind that changes your life, is about knowing exactly what you're waiting for and being smart enough to keep your mouth shut until the moment is perfect. 3 months after my divorce was finalized, I learned the difference between hoping for a miracle and engineering one. I was living in this tiny apartment above Romano's Bakery in Fremont. The kind of place where you wake up every morning to the smell of fresh bread and the sound of delivery trucks rattling the windows. It wasn't glamorous. Hell, it wasn't even particularly clean, but it was mine. And after months of living in a house that felt like a museum of failed expectations, mine was the most beautiful word in the English language. The apartment came furnished in what I generously called early American garage sale, a couch that had seen better decades, a dining table that wobbled if you looked at it wrong, and a bed that made sounds like it was dying every time I rolled over. But it had decent Wi-Fi and a window that looked out over the ship canal. And honestly, that was all I needed while I figured out what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life. I wasn't job hunting, which probably should have worried me more than it did. My severance was decent enough to keep me fed and housed for a while. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night without waking up in a cold sweat about mortgage payments and credit card bills, and whether my wife still loved me enough to pretend she wasn't embarrassed by my existence. But mostly I was waiting because 3 days after I'd signed my divorce papers, my phone had started ringing with a very specific kind of call. The kind that made my heart race and my hands shake and my brain start calculating numbers that seemed too big to be real. The first call came from TechFlow Industries, some startup that had somehow gotten wind of my algorithm and wanted to know if I'd be interested in licensing opportunities. The second came from Data Stream Solutions, a mid-tier company that specialized in enterprise software and had apparently been watching my patent filings like some people watch stock prices. By the end of the week, I had 6 companies expressing serious interest in what they politely called my intellectual property assets. That's when I called IOMO again. Because if there's one thing getting divorced teaches you, it's that you never ever make major financial decisions without talking to someone smarter than you who charges enough money to actually give a about protecting your interests. Adrian, she said after I'd explained the situation, you need more than a divorce attorney. You need a business attorney, a tax strategist, and probably a therapist because you're about to enter a world where everyone's going to want to be your best friend. And most of them are going to be lying through their teeth. Enter Luis Romero, tax strategist, extraordinaire, and the kind of man who could find loopholes in the 10 Commandments if you paid him enough. Luis was guy for complex financial structures. The wizard behind the curtain who helped rich people stay rich by making sure Uncle Sam got his cut, but not a penny more than absolutely necessary. Here's what we're going to do, Luis explained during our first meeting, spreading papers across his conference table like he was planning a military campaign. We don't want this money anywhere near your personal name. Too messy, too traceable, too many ways for it to come back and bite you in the ass if your circumstances change. The structure he designed was beautiful in its complexity. First, we'd create Northbridge Analytics LLC, a limited liability company that would hold the patent and conduct all the negotiations. Then, we'd create the Onyx Trust, which would own Northbridge and serve as an additional layer of protection between me and the money. I'd be the beneficiary of the trust, but not the owner, which meant that legally speaking, I didn't own the patent or the company or the eventual proceeds from any sale. This is overkill, I said, looking at the organizational chart that looked like it had been designed by someone with trust issues and a law degree. Overkill is exactly what you want when you're about to make more money than you've ever seen in your life, Louise replied. The more layers between you and the cash, the harder it is for anyone to come after it later. Ex-wives, creditors, the IRS, they can all try, but they'll be fighting shadows and paperwork instead of hitting a real target. The negotiations took 6 weeks. And let me tell you, watching corporate lawyers fight over your intellectual property is like watching lions fight over a gazelle, except the gazelle is worth 8 figures and everyone involved bills by the 15-minute increment. It turned out that my little algorithm wasn't just useful, it was revolutionary. The kind of breakthrough that could save Fortune 500 companies millions of dollars in processing costs while making their systems run faster than a cheetah on Red Bull. Every company that had called wanted exclusive rights, not just licensing deals, which meant they were basically bidding on my entire future in the most expensive auction I'd never planned to enter. Megatech Solutions, the same corporate who'd fired me from Victorium, ended up winning the bidding war, which was ironic enough to make me believe in cosmic justice. They wanted my algorithm so badly they were willing to pay what Louise kept calling you money, which apparently is a technical term for amounts that are large enough to fundamentally change your relationship with money forever. The final negotiations happened in IOMA's conference room with me sitting quietly in the corner while lawyers in thousand suits argued over decimal points that represented more money than most people see in a lifetime. I felt like I was watching someone else's life, like I'd accidentally wandered into a movie where the protagonist gets rich through a series of coincidences and smart decisions that seemed too convenient to be real. But when they finally reached an agreement and Louise slid the contract across the table for my signature, the number at the bottom was very, very real. $167 million. $167 million for an algorithm I developed in my spare time because I was too obsessive-compulsive to accept that data processing had to be inefficient. I signed with steady hands, trying to look like the kind of person who negotiated 9-figure deals on a regular basis instead of someone who'd been eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. Then I walked outside, turned off my phone, and walked to the pier where Sabrina and I used to go on our early dates back when we thought we were building something that would last. I stood there for an hour, letting the wind hit my face until the water blurred and the city lights started reflecting off the sound like scattered diamonds. I didn't call anyone, didn't celebrate, didn't even allow myself to think about what this meant for my future. I just stood there and breathed, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Complete, total, overwhelming peace. When I finally went home to my shitty little apartment above the bakery, I did something that probably would have horrified every financial advisor in Seattle. I went to sleep. Didn't buy anything. Didn't change anything. Didn't even check my bank balance to make sure the wire transfer had gone through. Instead, I built a small team. Martichin agreed to come on as my advisor, bringing her decades of tech industry wisdom and her supernatural ability to spot from 3 time zones away. Victor, my former teammate from Victoria, joined as head of engineering, probably because he was tired of working for companies that couldn't see past their next quarterly report. And Kesha Williams, an operations specialist I'd known from my early days in tech, rounded out the group as the person who'd make sure we actually got done instead of just talking about getting done. We paid ourselves modestly, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to attract attention or change our lifestyles dramatically. The rest went back into building products, developing new algorithms, creating the kind of company I'd always wanted to work for, but had never been smart enough to build. For the first time in years, I slept. Really slept. Not the exhausted collapse of someone who'd been running on stress and caffeine, but the deep restful sleep of someone who finally understood that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. And the beautiful part, nobody knew. Not my former colleagues, not my neighbors, not even I was just Adrian Okoye, recently divorced software engineer who lived above a bakery and seemed to be handling his post-marriage life with unusual calm. The money sat in accounts I'd never touch, protected by legal structures designed by people smarter than me, generating returns that would fund whatever came next. And for the first time since I'd met Sabrina Holt on that rooftop a lifetime ago, I felt like the luckiest bastard alive. You know what they say about secrets in the digital age? They're like radioactive material with a half-life measured in Instagram stories and LinkedIn updates. Doesn't matter how careful you are, how many layers of legal protection you build, how quietly you try to live your new life, eventually someone's going to notice that the guy who used to clip coupons is suddenly acting like money isn't a concern. And when that someone has connections and a law degree and a pathological need to be right about everything, well, that's when your peaceful little existence gets blown to smithereens. The leak started, as these things usually do, with someone who should have minded their own damn business. Monica Patterson, Sabrina's ride or die from law school, the woman who'd been posting those girls' night photos that documented my wife's gradual transformation from married woman to single and ready to mingle. Monica had always been one of those people who collected gossip like vintage wine. She didn't necessarily drink it right away, but she kept it stored somewhere safe until the perfect moment to uncork it and watch the chaos unfold. Apparently, Monica had been doing some light social media stalking because that's what unemployed lawyers do with their time. When she noticed some interesting patterns in my post-divorce behavior, like the fact that I'd been spotted at Romano's bakery every morning, looking suspiciously relaxed for someone who should have been pounding the pavement looking for work, or the fact that my LinkedIn profile hadn't been updated in months, which in tech world is basically equivalent to announcing that you've given up on life entirely. But the real red flag was probably when Victor posted a photo of our small team meeting at some coffee shop in Capitol Hill with me looking way too comfortable for someone whose alimony payments should have left him eating ramen for the foreseeable future. Nothing obvious, nothing that would make normal people suspicious. But Monica wasn't normal people. Monica was a lawyer with time on her hands and a best friend who'd been bragging about how thoroughly she'd cleaned out her loser ex-husband. The first shot across the bow came in the form of an Instagram story that was so passive-aggressive it could have been used as evidence in a graduate course on social manipulation. A photo of some expensive cocktail with the caption "Celebrating with friends who know the value of honesty, nail polish sparkles." Some people pretend to be broke, but karma has a way of exposing the truth. #authenticity #real talk #bless subtle as a brick through a window but effective. Within hours I started getting texts from mutual friends, casual little messages asking how I was doing, whether I'd found work yet, if I needed anything, the kind of concerned outreach that happens when rumors start circulating and people want to position themselves on the right side of whatever drama is about to explode. I ignored them all, kept my head down, went about my business, pretended like I didn't notice the way conversations stopped when I walked into rooms or the looks people gave me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Because here's the thing about rumors. They only have power if you feed them. Deny them too strongly and you look guilty. Acknowledge them at all and you're basically confirming that there's something to be suspicious about. But Sabrina wasn't content to let sleeping dogs lie. After 2 weeks of social media silence, which for her was basically equivalent to a monk's vow of digital celibacy, she reappeared with what I can only describe as sharpened resolve. Gone were the triumphant post-divorce selfies and inspirational quotes about new beginnings. In their place was something harder, more focused, like she'd been using her offline time to do research and plan strategy. The courier showed up on a Tuesday morning just like last time. But this package felt different. Heavier, more official, more expensive, if such a thing was possible. Inside was a motion to reopen financials that was so thick it could have been used as a weapon, accompanied by allegations that read like they'd been written by someone who'd spent considerable time and money investigating every aspect of my post-divorce life. The basic theory was elegant in its simplicity. I had hidden assets during our divorce proceedings, concealed income that should have been included in our settlement, and generally committed fraud on a scale that would make Bernie Madoff proud. According to Sabrina's new legal team, because apparently Morrison, Kane, and associates weren't cutthroat enough for this particular blood sport. I had engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud my ex-wife of her rightful share of marital assets. Defendant concealed material financial information. Read one particularly delicious paragraph, including but not limited to intellectual property assets, pending business negotiations, and anticipated income from the sale of proprietary technology. Plaintiff was fraudulently induced to accept a settlement that grossly undervalued the marital estate. The beauty of it was that they weren't entirely wrong. I had been negotiating with companies about my patent. I had known that my financial situation was likely to improve dramatically. I had signed the divorce agreement while sitting on information that would have changed everything if Sabrina had known about it. The ugly part was that none of that mattered legally speaking because of a little thing called timing and an even littler thing called that beautiful bulletproof overprotective clause that Kane Whitlow had warned might be too restrictive. But Sabrina's angle was clean and simple. I'd hidden the payout during our divorce, which made our settlement fraudulent, which meant she deserved her fair share of what should have been marital property all along. It was the kind of argument that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely at the dates, the documentation, or the legal language that she'd been so eager to sign just a few months earlier. What she didn't know, what her expensive new lawyers apparently hadn't bothered to investigate thoroughly before filing their motion, was that every single aspect of my defense was documented, time-stamped, and legally bulletproof. The sale had happened months after our divorce decree was finalized, not before. The patent was filed in my name alone, years before our marriage started falling apart, maintained with my own money and my own labor. And most beautifully, most ironically, most perfectly, all proceeds from the sale had gone directly to Northbridge Analytics LLC, which was owned by the Onyx Trust, which meant that technically, legally, provably, I had never personally received a single penny from the transaction that had made me rich. But the real kicker, the cherry on top of this legal sundae, was that clause she'd signed without reading carefully. That overprotective, unnecessarily restrictive, supposedly unfair clause that prevented either of us from making any future financial claims against the other, regardless of changed circumstances. She had literally signed away her rights to any money I might make in the future, then sued me for making money in the future, apparently without realizing that those two things were mutually exclusive in the eyes of the law. I called Ioma as soon as I finished reading the motion, and for the first time since I'd known her, I heard her laugh out loud during a professional conversation. "Adrian," she said, "I've seen a lot of stupid legal strategies in my career, but this might be the stupidest. They're essentially arguing that you defrauded her by not predicting the future accurately enough during your divorce proceedings. So, we fight it. Oh, we're going to do more than fight it. We're going to counterclaim for breach of settlement, frivolous litigation, and attorney's fees. Because if someone's going to weaponize the court system to try to get a second bite at your apple, they're going to pay for the privilege." For the first time in months, I smiled. Really smiled. The kind of grin that starts in your chest and spreads outward until you feel like you might actually burst from the sheer joy of watching someone's carefully laid plans explode in their face. Sabrina wanted a war. Fine, she could have her war, but she was about to learn the difference between fighting someone who was desperate and fighting someone who had nothing left to lose and unlimited resources to make sure justice got served with a side of very expensive legal fees. There's something almost religious about a courtroom when you're not the one about to get crucified. The high ceilings, the polished wood, the way everyone speaks in measured tones like they're afraid of waking up some sleeping god of justice who might smite them for being too loud. King County Superior Court, Department 12. The Honorable Maris Morales presiding, was about to become the stage where my ex-wife's carefully constructed delusion would meet the cold, hard reality of contract law and proper documentation. I'd been in courtrooms before. Nothing dramatic, just the usual adult responsibilities like settling my parents' estate and dealing with insurance companies who thought act of God was a legitimate way to avoid paying claims. But this was different. This was personal. This was the woman who'd laughed at my failures, dismissed my potential, and signed away her rights to my success, trying to convince a judge that she deserved a second chance to profit from the very achievements she'd been so confident would never happen. Justice Morales looked exactly like what you'd want in a judge, mid-50s, graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every variety of the legal system had to offer and wasn't impressed by any of it. She'd been on the bench for 12 years, according to the research I'd done, with a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics and focusing on what the law actually said rather than what lawyers wished it said. Sabrina sat at the plaintiff's table looking like she'd stepped out of a corporate headshot session. Perfect posture, conservative suit, hairstyled in that trustworthy professional woman look that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She'd lost weight since our divorce. I noticed, and there was something harder about her face, more angular, like success had sharpened her features along with her ambitions. Kane Whitlow had apparently been replaced by someone even more expensive. Marcus Chun, no relation to my martyr, a partner at Blackstone and Associates, who specialized in high net worth divorce cases and had the kind of reputation that made opposing counsel update their malpractice insurance. Chun looked like he'd been carved out of granite and dressed by someone who understood that intimidation was just another billable service. Your Honor, Shen began, and his voice had that courtroom quality that made every word sound like it was being engraved in marble. My client was the victim of a systematic campaign of financial deception. The defendant concealed assets, misrepresented his financial prospects, and fraudulently induced Mrs. Holt to accept a settlement that grossly undervalued the marital estate. He was good. I'll give him that. The way he laid out their case made it sound almost reasonable. Poor Sabrina, deceived by her scheming husband, who'd hidden his true worth and tricked her into accepting pennies when she deserved dollars. He talked about equitable interests and material misrepresentations and the duty of full financial disclosure like he was reciting scripture. The timeline he presented was masterful in its selective editing. Yes, I had been negotiating with companies about my patent. Yes, I had known my financial situation was likely to improve. Yes, I had failed to disclose these negotiations during our divorce proceedings. When you put it like that without context or legal nuance, it sounded like fraud. Hell, it almost convinced me and I was the guy who'd lived through the actual events. The defendant, Chun continued, warming to his theme, signed a divorce agreement while sitting on a patent worth over $160 million. This was not some unexpected windfall or lucky lottery ticket. This was a calculated business transaction that he deliberately concealed from his wife and her counsel. Sabrina nodded along like she was hearing these facts for the first time, playing the role of the wronged woman with Oscar-worthy conviction. She'd probably practiced that expression in the mirror, that perfect blend of hurt and indignation that made you want to write her a check just to make the pain go away. But then it was turn, and watching her work was like watching a surgeon operate with a scalpel made of pure legal precision. Your Honor, she said, rising from her chair with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing you're holding all the aces. The plaintiff's motion is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of both the timeline of events and the legal obligations of the parties during divorce proceedings. She didn't theatrical or loud or dramatic. She just laid out the facts one by one like she was building a house that nobody could tear down. First, the timeline. The patent sale had occurred 3 months after the divorce decree was finalized. Not 3 days, not 3 weeks, 3 months. Long enough for Sabrina to change her relationship status on Facebook, start dating again, and post approximately 47 Instagram stories about her fabulous new single life. Second, the ownership structure. The patent had been filed in my name alone years before our marriage started showing cracks, maintained with my own money, developed using my own time and expertise. It was as much marital property as the thoughts in my head or the dreams I had at night. Third, the financial structure. All proceeds from the sale had gone to Northbridge Analytics LLC, owned by the Onyx Trust. I had never personally received a single dollar from the transaction. Technically, legally, provably, I was no richer today than I had been on the day we'd signed our divorce papers. But the beautiful part, the piece to resistance, the moment when you could actually see the air go out of Chin's carefully constructed case was when pulled out the settlement agreement and read aloud from paragraph 14 subsection C. Both parties agree that this settlement represents a full and final resolution of all financial claims between them. Neither party shall have any right to seek modification, additional support, or any other financial remedy from the other party, regardless of changed circumstances, increased income, inheritance, lottery winnings, business success, or any other improvement in either party's financial condition. She let that sink in for a moment. The courtroom so quiet you could hear the bass breathing. Then she continued, Your Honor, the plaintiff signed this agreement willingly with full legal representation after her counsel specifically warned that this clause might be overprotective and that she might regret waiving future claims. She chose to sign anyway because she wanted a quick divorce and believed her husband would never amount to anything more than his current circumstances suggested. Justice Morales had been taking notes throughout both presentations, but now she looked up and you could see her making connections, following the legal logic to its inevitable conclusion. She asked exactly 3 questions, each one surgical in its precision. Counselor Chun, are you arguing that your client should be rewarded for making a bad bet? Miss Duru, was there any legal obligation for your client to disclose ongoing patent negotiations that might or might not result in future income? And finally, both counselors, how does this court reconcile a claim for concealed assets when those assets demonstrably did not exist at the time the settlement was executed? Chun tried to recover, talking about equitable interests and the spirit of full disclosure and public policy concerns about rewarding deception, but you could see him flailing, trying to find some legal foothold that didn't exist because his client had already signed away her standing to make these arguments. Justice Morales didn't even recess to consider her decision. She simply closed the folder in front of her and looked directly at Sabrina for the first time during the proceedings. "Motion denied," she said with the kind of finality that made the words feel like a door slamming shut. "Dismissed with prejudice," but if wasn't finished, she rose again, smooth as silk, and presented our counterclaim for breach of settlement agreement and attorney's fees. The judge granted it without hesitation, noting that weaponizing the courts for buyer's remorse was not an acceptable use of judicial resources and that frivolous litigation should have consequences. That's when Sabrina's composure finally cracked. Just for a moment, just long enough for me to see the woman I'd married, not the polished professional or the calculating ex-wife, but the person who'd realized she'd just made a very expensive mistake, and there was no taking it back. She didn't look at me as they filed out, but Kane did. The expression on his face suggested he was already calculating how much this disaster was going to cost his malpractice insurance. Outside the courthouse, Ioma and I stood in the Seattle drizzle while she explained what had just happened in terms that didn't require a law degree to understand. "She bet against you," she said simply. "She bet that you'd never be worth more than your severance package, and she lost. Now she gets to pay for the privilege of being wrong." As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that night on the rooftop when Sabrina had said yes to my proposal. Complete, total, overwhelming certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The only difference was that this time I was the only one celebrating. You know that moment after a thunderstorm when everything goes quiet and you can finally hear yourself think again? When the air smells clean and the world looks washed and new and you realize that all the noise and fury that seemed so important just a few hours ago was really just weather passing through. That's what the weeks after the courtroom felt like. Like I'd been living through a hurricane for years and had finally reached the calm that comes after the storm moves on to terrorize someone else's life. I wrote one letter, not an email, not a text, not some passive-aggressive social media post that would let everyone know I'd won without actually saying it. An actual letter on actual paper, the kind of formal correspondence that people used to send when they wanted their words to carry weight. I spent 3 hours writing it, crossing out lines, starting over, trying to find the perfect balance between grace and finality. "Dear Sabrina," it began, because even after everything, she deserved that much courtesy. "Thank you for leaving quickly. I could not have built this with you beside me. The peace I have is worth more than the money." That was it. 41 words that said everything I'd been thinking for months, but had never been able to articulate. Not you for trying to steal my money, or I hope you learned your lesson, or any of the petty vindictive things I could have said, just acknowledgement of a simple truth. Some people are meant to be part of your journey and some people are meant to show you why you needed to take a different path. I sealed it in an envelope, wrote her address in my careful handwriting, and walked it to the post office myself. No return address, no request for a response, no expectation that she'd understand or appreciate the sentiment, just a clean ending to a chapter that had gone on way too long. The call started 3 days later. The first one came while I was having coffee at Romano's, sitting at my usual table by the window, where I could watch the morning commuters rushing past like they were running from something that was chasing all of them. My phone buzzed, and Sabrina's name appeared on the screen like a ghost from a life I'd already buried. I let it ring, watched it go to voicemail, went back to my coffee and my newspaper like nothing had happened. The second call came that evening while I was cooking dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce and the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from feeding yourself food you actually want to eat instead of whatever someone else thinks you should be grateful for. Again, I let it ring again. I went back to what I was doing. Like my phone was just another kitchen appliance making noise. The third call came the next morning, early enough that it woke me up from the kind of deep, dreamless sleep I'd been enjoying since the courtroom. This time, I turned off my phone entirely and went for a walk around Green Lake, where families were feeding ducks and couples were holding hands and the world was continuing to spin just fine without my participation in whatever drama Sabrina was trying to create. But on the fourth call, something made me answer. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure, maybe just the perverse desire to hear what she thought she could possibly say that would change anything about our situation. I picked up on the final ring right before it would have gone to voicemail again. Adrian. Her voice was different than I remembered. Smaller somehow, less confident, like she'd been practicing what to say, but couldn't quite get the words to come out right. "Hello, Sabrina. Adrian, I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding her breath and finally decided to let it all out at once. "I didn't know. I was angry. I thought you'd hidden something from me. And I couldn't stand the idea that you'd gotten over on me somehow. I thought about the rooftop where we'd met, about the townhouse we'd bought together, about the dreams we'd shared, and the life we tried to build before it all went sideways. I thought about her laugh in our kitchen, about the lawyer voice, about the months of quiet contempt that had slowly poisoned everything we'd once had. But mostly, I thought about the man I'd been when I'd loved her, and the man I'd become since I'd stopped trying to be someone she could respect. Can we talk? She continued when I didn't respond immediately. Maybe we could meet for coffee or dinner or something. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but maybe we could. I wish you well, Sabrina, I said, cutting her off as gently as I could. Some bridges burned clean for a reason. I hung up before she could respond, before she could try to negotiate or bargain or lawyer her way back into a life that had moved on without her. Then I turned off my phone again and walked downstairs to Romano's, where the smell of fresh bread and the sound of normal people living their normal lives reminded me that the world was much bigger than my marriage had ever been. Victor sent me a build link while I was sitting there. Some new feature he'd been working on that would make our latest project even more elegant than it already was. Kesha pinged me about a customer win. Some Fortune 500 company that had decided our algorithms were exactly what they'd been looking for to solve problems they hadn't even known they had. Marta texted me a simple message. Proud of how you carried your silence. That last one made me smile. Really smile. The kind of expression that starts in your chest and spreads outward until you feel like you might actually burst from the sheer joy of being exactly who you're supposed to be. People ask me if I ever felt revenge. Friends, colleagues, even Aunt during one of our Sunday dinners when she was trying to understand how I'd managed to come through everything so unscathed. They want to know if I enjoyed watching Sabrina's case collapse. If I took satisfaction in her public humiliation, if some part of me was glad that the woman who'd bet against me had lost so spectacularly. The honest answer is no. I didn't feel revenge. Because revenge requires you to still care enough about someone to want them to suffer. What I felt was relief. Pure, clean, overwhelming relief that the chapter was finally closed and I could get on with writing the rest of my story without worrying about someone trying to edit it from the margins. The patent paid me more money than I'd ever imagined having. The clause protected me from anyone who thought they deserved a piece of what I'd built. The trust structure kept it all safe from future complications or unforeseeable circumstances. But none of that was the real victory. The real victory was the laugh. That clean, brutal laugh that had taught me the most important rule I now live by. Build in private, sign in ink, love with care, and never explain your blessings to someone who enjoys your fear. I live above a bakery now in an apartment that smells like fresh bread every morning and overlooks a canal where boats carry cargo to places I've never been. I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes. But I still buy my coffee from the same place and read my newspaper at the same table and walk the same route around the lake when I need to think. My team is small but brilliant, building products that solve real problems for real people instead of just moving money around in increasingly complicated ways. We're profitable, sustainable, and growing at exactly the pace we choose instead of the pace some investor thinks will maximize their returns. And sometimes when I'm sitting by my window watching the morning commuters rush past, I think about that rooftop party where I met a sharp, confident woman who seemed to have all the answers. I think about the man I was then, hopeful, naive, so eager to build a life with someone that I ignored all the signs that we were building toward completely different destinations. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret marrying her. I don't even regret the divorce because without it, I never would have learned the difference between being someone's partner and being someone's investment portfolio. What I regret is how long it took me to realize that the most important person I needed to prove myself to was me. The rest, as they say, is just noise that eventually fades to silence. Leaving you alone with the life you've built and the peace you've earned and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes if you're patient and smart and incredibly lucky, the universe gives you exactly what you need exactly when you need it, even if you didn't know you needed it at the time.